Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Safety Included, the workplace health and safety webinar series presented by Encompass Michigan, the statewide network of comprehensive human service providers. Our topic today is preventing slips, trips, and falls. My name is Todd Culver. I'm the president and CEO here at Encompass Michigan, and I'll be joined in a moment by Katie Kinde, who's our education coordinator. This material was prepared under a Consultation Education and Training, or SET grant. It was awarded by MIOSHA, the Michigan Occupational Safety and Health Administration, which is a part of the Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity. Encompass Michigan has a longstanding partnership with MIOSHA, including this training project and our strategic alliance, and we value that partnership very highly. My role at Encompass Michigan involves leadership and program development, strategic planning, financial planning, always in alignment with our core purpose, vision, and values. And it's been my privilege to be with the association since 1995, including as a project director and assistant director. And in that project director role, I led the technical assistance and training project that's funded by this grant, allowing me to connect directly with member organizations for many years. Prior to coming to Encompass, I did work in the manufacturing sector for an automotive supplier with plant management responsibilities that included environmental, health and safety compliance. So a long history of connection to health and safety content as well as regulatory issues. Katie, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
I'd love to. My name is Katie Kinde. I am a 35-year-old autistic self-advocate. I love learning, but I also love helping others learn. Excuse me. I graduated with a master's in education with a focus in learning design and technology in 2021 from Wayne State University. I love working for Encompass. I am the education coordinator. I create trainings, coordinate events, and handle certificate distribution. I've completed multiple leadership programs, and I've presented multiple times about autism in the workplace. I became a co-leader in 2024 for the Michigan Advocates to End Seclusion and Restraint, and now I'm on the board. In my spare time, I love doing a lot of crafty things, but mostly I love playing video games with my husband and taking my dog on walks.
Thanks, Katie. It's important that you know that inclusivity is important to us, and this content was developed with all needs in mind. We try to avoid using too many colors or pictures, and when we do, attempt to describe them, particularly for low vision users. Handouts are available on a shared drive, and a link to that will be posted in the chat box. So this project, Safety Included, follows OSHA, federal OSHA's recommended practices for safety and health programs. And those recommendations present a step-by-step approach to implementing a program that's built around 7 core elements. And the main goal of these safety and health programs is to prevent workplace injuries and illnesses and the suffering and financial hardship that they can cause. And that's not just for workers involved, but also for their families as well as employers. These practices use what's described as a proactive approach to managing workplace safety and health. A lot of times, traditional approaches are reactive. In other words, problems are only addressed after somebody gets hurt or somebody gets sick, or perhaps a new standard or regulation is published, or maybe there's an outside inspection that finds a problem that needs to be fixed. The practices that we support, including the preventive strategies for avoiding slips, trips, and falls that'll be presented in this training, recognize that finding and fixing hazards before they cause that injury is a far more effective approach. The most rigorous program takes the view that there is always, and always is capitalized intentionally here, something about an incident that leads to an injury that could have been different. In other words, accidents don't just happen. So it's important that we all continuously assess the landscape to try to identify the potential for a problem and then fix it before it occurs. And that's what this presentation is all about, as are all the presentations in the Safety Included series, providing a framework for effective safety programs that promote prevention through the lens of inclusivity, particularly supporting a neurodiverse workforce. So this content will be presented with clear and structured visuals, a few graphics that will support, we hope, comprehension. Katie will discuss some other factors that are involved in rendering trainings more inclusive, such as minimizing sensory distractions in both virtual and in-person settings, some options for verbal and nonverbal participation, options for some interactive components that can promote engagement without overwhelming, and other considerations such as time buffered schedules that allow for processing and reflection. The bottom line for us is that a safe workplace is sound business, and that's for everybody, regardless of neurotype. So, specific to slips, trips, and falls and their prevention, we'll provide you with some pretty technical definitions of what constitutes these three types of incidents. More importantly, the conditions that can cause accidents that lead to these events, and some effective prevention strategies, which again is kind of the heart of the matter. And towards the end, we'll point out some things to look for that are frequently missed in prevention programs that are specific to slips, trips, and falls. Katie will also talk about, as I mentioned, some training considerations for businesses that can promote building trust, reduce sensory overload or sensitivities, integration of verbal and nonverbal folks into the training and learning process, offering clear signs. We'll have an example of that for you a bit later. The concept of developing an emergency or safety buddy, the dynamic known as proprioception, which Katie will define and explain in a bit, and some, again, time buffered schedules that allow for memory capacity, and the impact of how content is delivered on memory capacity, as well as where the training is located. And we hope that you will be able to use the resources that are both in the chat and that we'll review towards the end from the Safety Included project. So some slip, trip, and fall data. The Federal Department of Labor has indicated, based on their collection of incidents that occur in the workplace, that slips, trips, and falls actually make up the majority of accidents that occur in general industry. They are the second. It's not always just minor incidents either that we might consider embarrassing or simply inconvenient. In fact, slips, trips, and falls are the second leading cause of workplace deaths as well. So it can lead to very serious injury. And they account, and this is nationally, for about 25% or 1/4 of all workers' compensation claims. A slip, defined, is the loss of balance that's caused by too little friction between a person's foot or shoe and a walking surface. And the most common causes for that are wet or oily surfaces, often created by spills, or weather hazards, especially outdoors, in parking lots and sidewalks, or in the transition point from outdoors to indoors, such as entryways. They can also be caused by loose rugs or mats or overly worn flooring materials. A trip, on the other hand, is when we hit an object and lose balance. So some common causes for trip accidents include an obstructed view, poor lighting, clutter or poor housekeeping conditions, carpeting that's torn, mats that are curled up on the floor, cords or cables across the walkway, or perhaps uneven walking surfaces. And to complete our definitions, a fall then is a loss of balance that results in a drop to the floor. And there are three types of falls categorized. First type of fall is one that occurs at the same level. So when a slip or a trip immediately precedes a drop to the floor. There's also a fall to a lower level, such as what might occur from a ladder or steps or stairs. And the third is a jump, what's categorized as a jump to a lower level. It's an accidental action, but it results in jumping off of one level to another. again, such as off that elevated surface like a ladder, stairs, or platform. So those are the definitions. As far as the dynamics go, our center of gravity for most folks is at hip level. When one foot advances, we can lose traction, and if that foot lacks friction with the walking surface, it can slide forward. The image that you see on the screen, or the image that appears on the screen, depicts the image of an individual slipping and falling. The other foot may not provide sufficient stability, and therefore a loss of balance occurs. And those are the technical components of a slip and fall, and it can result in trauma to our backside, hips, back, or even head. And again, it's important to remember this isn't just an embarrassment. It's quite often an incident that leads to significant costly injuries. Some causes for slip and fall accidents include, again, flooring when there's not enough or too much friction, usually not enough, such as when a spill occurs, and that accounts for about half of all accidents that result. Footwear also contributes when boots or shoes are not suitable for the working surface, actually in up to 1/4 almost of the accidents that result. The remaining fall into some minor percentages, those that are fraudulent in nature, failure to identify a hazard by the employee or folks responsible for hazard detection, or poor training. And the source for this data is the National Floor Safety Institute. So a few things to look for. If the majority of slip and fall accidents then are attributed to flooring and footwear, it's important to continuously monitor surfaces. And this is both inside the workplace and out. And what we're looking for in the format that we create for employees to do this monitoring is the maintenance of level, clear, dry walkways. And also, it's important to provide specific guidelines to employees for proper shoes or boots that are slip resistant in nature. So the type of sole that a shoe has will have a big impact on its ability to keep a person safe. Hazard identification and training. We should promote and reward recognition of both hazards and their correction so that it's not when an employee recognizes a condition that could lead to a slip and fall. It's not viewed as an inconvenience, but it's to be celebrated and congratulated so that folks are encouraged to identify hazards and ultimately to correct them. And there's ongoing training and coaching that are part of a successful preventive program as well. Simply encouraging folks to slow down or perhaps shorten their stride, particularly when conditions are a bit slippery, resulting from weather. The high risk areas are in transitions or at curbs. There are three images on the screen. The first is a cart that's carrying some stored material in a box that's going over an entry mat. The second image also depicts an entry mat with a pedestrian entering the building. And the third image, a curb that's been highlighted in yellow paint. So the transition areas, entry mats, or when we're moving from a carpeted surface to tile, when there's any change in that material, it's when the risk of slip and fall elevates. And when there's that change in elevation, such as at a curb, and especially those that are not well marked, like the one in the picture is, can cause trips. These are the areas that are really have been identified as the highest risk. On a stairway, which we mentioned, can cause a couple of different types of falls. The design and construction is important. The width and depth and height of steps are usually very specifically dictated in design and layout of a building when it's built, but sometimes when additions are made, there can be inconsistencies there that can create problems when folks become accustomed to very specific dimensions of how wide the stairs are, how high they are, and how deep the treads are. So continuously monitoring stairway conditions is helpful. There can be poor tread or step surface materials on the stairs. If those riser dimensions varies, that's the height of the steps, that can cause problems. And we should have handrails for a stairway. So the lack thereof can cause problems. Or if those railings perhaps are in place at an improper height where they're not as useful as they could be. A good fall prevention program then has a role in overall workplace safety strategy. At its foundation is a culture of good housekeeping and preventive maintenance. The specific elements of selecting and treating flooring surfaces also plays a role. Selection is in the design and construction phase, and treatment for the custodial and janitorial care. And then employee engagement, management responsibility, and leadership all play a role. Talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So there's a three-step program. The first is to identify risks. The second is to implement procedures that what we refer to as abate those conditions. You've identified the risk and then you fix it so that it doesn't cause a problem. Training employees accordingly. And then documentation plays a role here as well. We need to document the procedures that are in place, the fact that they are followed, and their resulting effectiveness so that we can consider whether or not they're not being effective and therefore need updating. We should inspect all working areas. So the image on the screen is of an individual in safety equipment that has a type of a clipboard that appears to be reviewing a checklist. And whatever format we design, it needs to be easy to use, user-friendly, and promotes easy recognition of whether or not, first of all, the monitoring has been completed, and second of all, what action needs to be taken if there's a problem that's detected. So the areas that should most often be on this type of inspection form or risk identification form are the parking lots outside a building looking for cracks, potholes, the results of weather conditions like standing water from rain or snow, any ramps, any change in elevation, the entrances and exits, again, those transition points between outdoors and indoors, any walkway, that's the sidewalk outdoors, that's the aisleway indoors, another change in elevation, such as stairways, which can be problematic if there's poor lighting or irregular height. If surfaces have become irregular in any way due to wear and tear, resulting in deterioration. And again, if carpets or mats are not properly secured, if if they slide along the floor and can create a slip, or if they're curled up at the edges and create a trip, those are the things that we want to identify and fix before a problem occurs. And in terms of abatement and training, training should always include how to identify these hazards. So very specific documentation of what to look for, where to look for it, and how to fix the items if there's something that's out of line. There can also be warnings of hazards when they can't be fixed, such as a wet floor sign. We'll show an example of that in a few minutes, or blocking off areas to prevent traffic in a spot that could cause a problem. The impact of slips, trips, and falls on employee health and the cost to employers should also be shared. This is available through your accident and injury data or your workers' compensation claim information to be able to demonstrate that, again, the kind of stuff that happens if these conditions aren't paid attention to isn't just embarrassing, it can cause a serious, costly injury. And also documenting procedures is important. So maintaining documentation for both inspection and maintenance. This establishes what we refer to as a standard of care for both employees and any visitors that you have in your workplace. It demonstrates evidence of adhering to safety best practices, and this can provide support for accreditation if your organization is accredited by CARF or another body, a compliance audit for any insurance agent or health and safety agency, as well as protection from any litigation that could occur. The documentation should indicate who conducted the inspection, who's responsible for any corrective action that's identified, and a place to show that it's been completed. We call that closing the loop. Make sure that the identification of the hazard is documented, the correction of the hazard is documented, who did it, and when it was done. And again, these logs and reports should be quick and easy and not optional. Mandatory is capitalized for a reason. Thanks, Katie. So again, some good housekeeping practices, foundational to slip, trip, and fall prevention, especially at entrance floor mats. There's great benefit to these. They can trap moisture and debris that can cause a slip and fall, so it can actually be part of a preventive program. It can reduce maintenance costs by protecting the surface so that it doesn't deteriorate as quickly. but there's also risk involved. As we've discussed, the placement or wear and tear can actually create placement can create a slip, or wear and tear can create a trip hazard that results in a fall. And as a general rule, if they're effective in doing their job, we should not be able to see footprints after stepping off a mat onto a floorway. And I'll close out this portion of the presentation with a few things to look out for that are frequently missed. These are 9 common mistakes, and the source for this information is our partners at Midwest Employers Casualty Company. The first is not being systematic enough in our approach to prevention. So this is in planning, design, for flooring surfaces, risk assessment and hazard correction to monitor conditions within a workplace, and then the documentation that we've actually gone through these steps to make sure that folks stay safe. The second is the wrong type of flooring. So this often occurs when aesthetics or appearance are given primary consideration rather than the function of the flooring, particularly if there's the potential for spills or the presence of liquids on the floor that can create slippery conditions. Budget constraints can lead to the choice of a cheaper material that's going to wear out faster and lead to an increased risk of slips and falls in the short term. Slip resistance should be a known characteristic of flooring when it's selected, and also how it's utilized. All those things really more on the front end of building design and planning are frequently missed when considering avoiding these types of incidents. Inadequate cleaning protocols can also contribute. Products, equipment, or even the process may not be the right one to achieve the desired effect, which is clean, clear, even, and dry. The fourth is ineffective spill or containment response procedures. So, as part of a fall prevention program, we should be assessing how likely a spill is to occur, how it would be detected if it did occur, what to look for, the locations to monitor more frequently than others. How will it be corrected? So, simply detecting a spill doesn't mean that we know how to clean it up properly to avoid any residue that can leave slippery conditions. And most importantly, how's it going to be prevented? Improper footwear, we've also discussed. This one gets missed a lot when slip-resistant characteristics are not considered in the sole construction of the footwear, particularly if a certain type of footwear is required. Accountability for mandatory shoes or boots. So if there's a policy in place, it needs to be enforced. And to be fair, we also need to have an equitable replacement policy because shoes and boots do wear out. Inadequate maintenance often is missed as well. Regular inspections don't occur, documentation is incomplete, or perhaps corrective action was not effective. And all those things, again, should be documented in the forms that are used for hazard detection. And the last three, if there's ineffective warnings, sometimes cones or signage or tape or barriers are important to make sure that folks stay away from areas that have become hazardous. So if these aren't placed properly, or if they're in areas where lighting is inadequate, that can cause a problem. We need to try to encourage prevention being integrated into everyday action. It becomes part of the culture of the workplace so that forms that we're asking folks to complete are accessible. They're easy to use, and their completion is clearly defined in a person's job responsibilities. And the last one is when follow-up is not thorough or neglected altogether. So it should always be documented. Did we find it? Did we fix it? And have we proven that it worked? And I'm going to turn it over to Katie now to discuss some suggestions for rendering training more effective and more inclusive. Katie?
Thanks so much, Todd. So this section is on how to train effectively, as Todd said. Each person, regardless of neurotype, has a preferred learning method. So us here at Encompass Michigan believe that this will help employers improve training methods for better outcomes by helping all neurotypes. So, these are some considerations for neurodiverse employees. Employees of different neurotypes may have different needs to consider. So, the best means to help your employees is by talking to them directly about their preferences and making sure that their learning needs are met by seeing what they need during the learning process. You can also gain trust by asking for consent to ask neurodivergent employees ways on improving training. So, Instead of just outright asking, you can say things like, would you like to discuss ways to improve this process for you so you can learn better? Also create a trusting relationship with your employees so that in times of stress like injury, employees can go to the employers without fear. Neurodiverse employees can have anxiety, so be patient. Um, Also, it brings up a good point where stressful moments like having an injury or when others have injuries or in an emergency, it's good to have an emergency buddy, which we'll talk about later. Also, during moments like this, speak concise and in a neutral tone so that you're not bringing up those emotions even higher if there's times of stress. Some employees may need additional support and freedom to ask questions to better understand. So it is important to forge this trust for asking questions early on. In other words, treat questions with respect so that employees do not fear being ridiculed in the future. So this is an example of a conversation that you may have with an employee who may be neurodiverse. The employee asks, what closet do I get the wet floor sign from? And the employer can say, there are two utility closets, one on each floor. I will show them both to you. And then the employee may ask, can I use a different colored sign? It would be easier for me to spot. The employer will say, let's talk about that more after the training. We have to make sure if we can do that. We want to be cautious that it doesn't conflict with the process in place. So it's really important during moments like this that instead of being like, why did they ask about changing the color of the sign? Um, Being more open-minded and seeing that they're just trying to learn and help themselves learn the best way they know. And maybe a different colored sign would help them not only notice the sign during a situation where the floor is wet, but it may also help them learn. So be open-minded when people are asking questions that may seem almost insignificant to you. It might be very significant to somebody, especially who's neurodiverse. Also, some neurotypes have what is termed as black and white thinking. They cannot see the gray in between. This is their way their brains see situations, usually with only two solutions. It also leads to rigidity, so believing there is only one right way to do things. So that's why it's also important to be concise with your directions. Another important topic is sensory overload. This is a state where the brain receives too much sensory input to process, leading to symptoms like anxiety, irritability, confusion, and physical discomfort. It can be triggered by common stimuli such as loud noises, bright lights, strong smells, and crowded spaces, but also by emotional distress, physical fatigue, or environmental changes. During sensory overload, information is also less likely to be retained, and this can lead to an unsuccessful training. So, recognizing the triggers and using strategies like reducing exposure to stimuli, using sensory aids, or finding quiet spaces can help you and your employees manage situations like this. Also too, like I said before, during times of emotional distress or just during an emergency situation, you can call this something else, but an emergency buddy, the main goal of it is just to ensure that there is a trustworthy coworker that a neurodivergent employee can go to in times of an emergency, who can guide them during moments they are overwhelmed. If their emotions are very high, they may sh shut down. We'll talk that about that a little later. But if they're shut down and they can't verbally talk, they may be able to at least, try to grab somebody if they can't verbally express what they need to express. Sensitivities, these are also important. So always consider ways to ensure neurodiverse people are comfortable when training to ensure information is more easily retained. Um, Neurodiverse people have sensitivities to things. So especially when it comes to employees with autism, they may be extra sensitive to loud noises or bright lights. These things can lead to sensory overload. So we're going to talk a little about ways to manage these sensitivities. Um, and always, first and foremost, ask your employees if any changes to their environment can help their learning experience and prevent sensory overload. While some of these can help during training, it may not be appropriate while equipment is operating, especially some of these, which are white noise machines, access to white noise music, tinted glasses, or headphones. In certain situations, especially if they're dealing with certain things, they may not be able to access white noise machines or tinted glasses, but each situation calls for different things. So just be mindful of that. Other auditory and visual considerations, ensure that your trainings are accessible. Neurodiverse people are prone to comorbidities, so visually you should have large text and describe images or steps for anyone with low vision. When speaking, ensure that you are using a microphone if any employees have low hearing, or maybe even a Bluetooth speaker next to the employees who might be like towards the back of a room if it's a room full of a lot of people. Consider sensitivities to scents as well. For those who are sensitive to scents, some smells may be overwhelming, especially from machinery. There are ways to manage these scents personally, environmentally. For employee personal management, you can always offer things that mask scents like Vicks Vapor Rub, lavender, peppermint oil, or even toothpaste under the employee's nose or inside their mask. Um, for breathing techniques, it's actually recommended that you can breathe through your mouth or take shallow breaths or even try humming, and that can block smells. Scented items also help, like minty gum, strong mints, or Listerine strips. Also make sure that all your employees are managing their um, personal hygiene, wearing clean uniforms and socks daily, avoiding carrying odors, and make sure that if there are any odors in the area that are unavoidable, let them step away for fresh air if they are overwhelmed. For environmental management, make sure that the area is clean, make sure all surfaces are clean, use enzymatic cleaners, and make sure that there's proper air circulation. You can either use fans or open windows too when possible. Consider tactile sensitivities as well. Sometimes we have an accommodations section in here where we recommend gloves and things like that when it's relevant. But if you are getting things for your employees like gloves or masks, they may have sensitivities towards certain materials. They may have discomfort issues with certain materials that are too rough on their skin. But they also, with comorbidities, they may have or they might have allergenic issues. So always getting hypoallergenic options of like gloves or masks is a good option because, again, those comorbidities are something that are quite frequent, especially with people with autism. Proprioception. This is an important topic because it is about the awareness of one's body. Um, you should always consider this, especially for your employees, because certain neurotypes have low proprioception, or in other words, they don't perceive themselves well, especially if they are hyper focused. They may work themselves too hard physically without even realizing until after the task is done, or they might accidentally like bump something off a counter or something. So, just be cautious of that. If you're worried about your workers, be proactive with reminders of self, like towards them. Todd actually does this for me a lot. So, I sometimes get a really bad back, and sometimes when I'm in the office, especially towards the last few days before we're getting ready for a conference, I'm always like trying to move a bunch of stuff around for the conference, and sometimes those are really heavy boxes, and I kind of grab them just without thinking. And then Todd usually goes like, "Hey, you might not want to do that. You might want to consider your back health." And then I go, "Oh yeah, that's a good idea. Thanks, Todd." So, it's good to just be proactive with reminders of self. especially when it applies, your coworkers really well. So also, proximity is an important topic. You may not think about this in your everyday interactions, but proximity comfort is something that should be discussed for your everyday interactions, even beyond trainings, because neurodiverse people may have a lot of discomfort when they are approached by somebody close up or even by, a singular touch to the shoulder or something like that, could be very uncomfortable. Even though something as simple as placing a hand on the shoulder, oh yeah, that's what I just said, may be extremely uncomfortable to a neurodivergent employee, and they may not even express this just out of fear of, maybe hurting someone's feelings or things like that. So instead of like just assuming, just always bring it up and always ask for consent when you're considering proximity to people. So, one way to consider this is during an interactive training in person on how to go through a procedure. Let's say a trainer wants to show an employee up close, something up close. Trainers should always ask if it's all right to be up close before showing each step. Also, if it's something that the employee can interact with, let the employee learn by going through the steps themselves. Also considered some employees may prefer verbal or nonverbal communication. And nonverbal isn't just about not talking, it's about using diverse communication methods, even gestures or visuals count beyond speech. Also, facing sensory challenges or processing language differently, like literal versus not nuanced. So sometimes like that can like include sarcasm and things like that too. Also, sometimes certain neurotypes may need to go nonverbal. This is where the employee shuts down due to overwhelm, and this requires patience and clear, direct communication, respecting their cues and understanding their unique sensory processing needs to help them through this and bridge the gap. So, the best way to manage a shutdown is to communicate with an employee before a shutdown. This helps you know exactly what the employee needs because they know what's best for themselves. Each individual may have different needs. Though it's not required, some employees may even prefer having signs on their name badge that show their current availability verbally. Color coding can be helpful. This can also be helpful when employees wear headphones. So, I've seen some like employers posting images online of having like little signs for a doorway that have like, available and not available. I've also seen little desk signs that have colors as well and verbiage of if they're available or not. I really like the color coding of like green as in okay to approach and orange as in like maybe not approach or like red as in please don't approach me. Also I've seen like little name badge accessories as well or stickers. So those are things to consider. Make sure when you make trainings that they are also clear. There's an example to follow. So, consider this caution wet floor sign. You may have seen things like this in many buildings, but essentially, what we want to point out is that it shows the most important information all in one page in large text, and also the fact that it's a simple figure. There isn't a lot of words on there. It just gets straight to the point. But also we want to mention that if you make signs like this, you may also consider adding contact information maybe at the bottom of a sign in case employees have questions. That way, people aren't left wondering like what to do in situations. So now we're going to go through a bunch of different methods and techniques or things to consider for trainings themselves. For example, this universal design method is a very helpful method that essentially just means having all different types of learning available for one training. So what that means is like videos, in person, documents, step by step, things like that. If you can provide a bunch of different types of training or formats of training for the same training, it can help people learn because each person learns differently. So it allows educators and learners to set clear goals, anticipate environmental barriers, create meaningful options, and fully embrace human variability. So, as I said before, having methods to learn, it safely ensures that everyone has the resources they need to learn processes, regardless of neurotype. So, consider making step-by-step documents, signs, videos, and plans on showing processes in person. And this way, everyone can have multiple options to learn the same information. So, this is also an important topic, time buffered schedules. It allows for processing and reflection for all neurotypes. Consider having breaks during long trainings or breaks in video trainings. So a 15-minute break for every 1 to 2 hours in person or during a live training is really important. Also be sure to break it up with activities and discussions. So this is what an example of like a live training may look like. I try to follow this format as well. Let's say from like 9:30 to 11 a.m. we have a training, maybe with two little short 10-minute breakout sessions in there. Um, and then from 11 to 11:15 a.m., give them a break, and let them, make phone calls and things like that. 11:15 to 12:30 would be another set of trainings, um, maybe with one little activity in there. But then from 12:30 to 1:30, make sure they get a good amount of time for lunch. And then from 1:30 to 3 o'clock could be another training section with two breakout activities in between. So this is a good format to go by. You don't have to go by these exact times or these exact amount of breakouts and things like that, but it's just something to consider if you're going to do an all-day training. So, what if you wanted to take that same roughly 6 hour training and record it? In other words, make it on demand and accessible at any time. That may look like 15 to 30-minute videos with questions in between. That would be best to ensure that people are reflecting what they looked at and, kind of rehashing the information in their brain. Understandably, that is a lot of editing, so breaking it up into hour-long videos is good if there's a way for learners to pause and return to the content. Even after all you can do to make a training, consider everyone's memory capacity. On average, it is estimated 50% of what is learned is immediately forgotten. So spaced learning helps retain what is taught. So we have a graph right here. On the y-axis is retention going upward and downward. On the x-axis going across left to right, there is time. The first point on the graph is day 0, and that's where somebody has learned something. And as this dot becomes a line across the x-axis, that line is going sharply down towards zero retention. As um, the employee or whoever is learning is actually retrieving or reviewing the information, however, there are points on this line where the line goes back up to the highest point on the graph and then slowly goes back down, and then goes up again when the employee has reviewed something and then slowly back down. But the most important thing about this is that the more times this person has actively retrieved something or viewed the information, the forgetting curve starts to flatten out so that the retention is like consistently flattening, and all the information is getting retained and sticking there, and it's not being forgetting, or it's not forgetting across the x-axis of time. So, if anyone ever wants me to like go through that better or explain it in a different way, please let me know. But I do think this is a pretty helpful graph. Training location. So there is evidence showing that information or attention for our neurotypes is also affected by location. So employees are more likely to remember information in the spot they learned that information. This means that procedures should be taught in the spot they will be used. Alrighty then. I'll just share this. So this is the considerations for trainings document that we created. Essentially, it asks, does your training meet the needs of all employees? Fill this chart to determine if you meet the needs of your staff. Ideally, it is best to fill this out with employees you wish to assist the most. So let's say this is for a bloodborne pathogens training. And I put a little date line there as well. This is all in the Google folder I shared. There is a blank version of this for you to fill out. The leftmost column is the types of consideration. The middle column is the current training. And the right column is any improvements to make. So the first type of consideration to uh, mention is, can employees freely ask questions? And let's say there's an employer who's filling this out, and they fill out, employees can ask their managers via email after the training. But then they kind of think about it. And so they fill in the rightmost column and say, we plan on making the training more interactive so employees can freely ask questions and that the trainer is respectful of all questions. Universal design. Are there multiple formats of the same training, in person versus virtual, handouts, recordings? And the manager fills out this current training slot. And it says we have an online training that is given live every year. We also have an in-person training given upon hire. And then in the improvement section, it says we will create some step-by-step documents and record the next virtual presentation to give employees the options to watch a recording. So yeah, this whole document has a bunch of different examples that you can look at and consider. Alrighty, so I hope going through that document helped you guys see that there are some resources for you if you wish to help your employees. Um, now we want to open the floor back up again. Is there anything specific from this training that would be beneficial for your safety trainings? And again, feel free to unmute yourself. We'd love to hear from you.
Or anything else, this is Todd, or anything else that was not included that would be beneficial to support your efforts to make training more inclusive.
Hi, my name is Bracken Merritt. I just wanted to
Hello.
hi. I just wanted to say um, the point you made on whether or not you have effective or ineffective response times as far as like cleaning up a mess or something like that. That's a great point and absolutely a point of emphasis I will be bringing to my team because there have been a couple situations where things have been a slip and trip uh, uh gate problem for more than 5 or 10 minutes. So just want to say thank you for that.
Thanks, appreciate that. I'm glad it was useful.
All right, would anyone else like to chime in? Alrighty, it sounds like everybody is satisfied, so I will move on to the next page. Todd, did you want to take over on the summary or?
Yeah, thanks,
Okay.
Katie. So we'll just go through a few highlights that we discussed in the first part of the presentation. In summary, again, maintaining traction and the right amount of friction is the key from a technical perspective to preventing slips, trips, and falls. It's also really important to choose the right flooring and footwear. So between flooring conditions and footwear, that accounts really for almost 3/4 of all slip, trip, and fall accidents. That good housekeeping, whether it's timeliness in response to an issue or the preventive documentation measures, are just part of a good housekeeping culture, as well as one that emphasizes preventive maintenance. And again, inspect and document. Easy to access, easy to use, and it thoroughly demonstrates that we did what we could to find and fix hazards before they caused a problem. The images on the screen were presented earlier of an individual slipping and falling, the transition area, which is a high risk area with a cart transporting a box across the mat, and an individual in safety gear conducting the inspection. All considerations and accommodations, as Katie reinforced, should be remembered when supporting a diverse workforce and supporting any workforce. And when creating trainings, remember to consider the needs of all your employees to support effective learning and retention. And we thank you for carving out time to spend with us this afternoon. If you have any questions that occur to you afterwards, please feel free to email either Katie or myself. The next couple of slides, which are available in that Google Drive that Katie placed a link to in the chat, include a lot of materials that you can use. And these are the resources that we used to develop the content here. The slides are in that Google Drive as well. But feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions. And as well, we are happy to provide live training on site or in person on occasion. If you have a specific request for that, you can reach out to Katie and talk about the number of employees, the topic that you're interested in, and how we might best support you. There's resources available both for the health and safety sort of compliance content, as well as Katie's content to promote effective learning, particularly for a neurodiverse audience. And this is how you get a hold of Katie. So again, thanks again, everybody, and have a great afternoon.